one, and we're in. Welcome everybody. We're just setting up here for our first live video debate. Let me just put you guys. Yes, that's great. Okay, there we go. Welcome everybody to our first live video debate here at Quality Debates. My name is Jonathan Thiessen. I will be moderating the debate. We're very happy you're joining us here for our first time. Tonight we'll be discussing ritual slaughter. Ritual slaughter is a process that is common with religious groups such as Jews and Muslims. And the main point of difference between normal slaughtering and religious slaughter is that the animal is not stunned beforehand. In accordance with European law, animals can actually only be slaughtered when they're stunned beforehand. However, there is an exception for ritual slaughter. But looking already at many European countries, there are already several countries such as Switzerland, Sweden, and Norway that have banned the practice. And the debate is always very hot. And currently, it's also a very active topic in Belgium. And a couple of years ago, it was also a very active topic in the Netherlands. Today, we'll be discussing the statement, ritual slaughtering without stunning should be forbidden. We have tonight with us two great guests. In favor of the statement is Sebastiaan Wolswinkel, who is the chairman of the youth wing for the Party for Animals, which currently holds 5 seats in the Dutch parliament. Against the statement is Jack Cohen, a philosophy graduate from the University College London and is currently studying in Israel to become a rabbi. We will start by hearing the opening statements of both speakers, and we'll open the debate after that between the two of them. And of course, you as viewer can constantly throughout the debate ask questions or share your opinion. You can do so by commenting right below in the stream, right there, yes, below the stream. And we actually have the option of highlighting comments, so we'll try to also interact as much as possible with all of you there who are watching this live video stream. That being said, I would say it's time to start, and we'll start today with Sebastiaan, who is in favor of the statement that ritual slaughter should be forbidden. Please, Sebastiaan, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. I would start by saying that from what I've heard and read, because I've looked into this a bit more recently, and I get the impression that there's genuine care from the people who are doing this ritual slaughter. They do seem to care about animal welfare. They want to take that into account, and they don't want to do unnecessary damage and pain to the animals. And I think that is obviously a good thing. I just don't see it square with this refusal to stun. And so I think that's really important that we look, why would we accept it? And the other problem, or the main problem here is, as you mentioned, that it's the religious freedom that's mentioned all the time. So I've seen arguments where they say the animal welfare isn't harmed too much, and yet then why would religious freedom be such a big topic? It doesn't make sense. You can't, you don't hear people talking about or defending the Salvation Army, for example, based on religious freedom. It doesn't need defending. You would only use this argument if there's something to defend, something you're trying to get away with that doesn't fit the moral standards we hold practices to account to these days. And that's what's the case with ritual sacrifice and, ritual slaughter, and the fact that that's, I would say that because of that, we just shouldn't allow it. That's, I see it quite simply in that way. The moment animals are suffering, you have to ask, what's the reason that we're allowing this? And I would say that religious freedom just isn't a valid reason.
Okay. Thank you for those opening remarks. Jack, please share with us your point of view on the statement, and then without already going directly into the points made by Sebastiaan, but first share your opinion.
All right. I firstly want to clarify that despite the fact I'm training to be a rabbi, I'm not an expert in Jewish law or in ritual slaughter, and I definitely don't speak for my religion. I'm speaking for myself. But I think that it's important before I say too much that I want to limit the discussion. I looked more into the side of Jewish ritual slaughter, even though I know that there is that the same thing happens in Islam. But I think that it's important that the debate is limited to the method of killing the animal, which is, as we're talking about, stunning. versus an incision into the neck of the animal. And I think that's where the debate has to happen, because further questions like what's the conditions in the abattoir, or how is the animal relaxed prior to death, I think vary in all different cases, both in ritual slaughter and not ritual slaughter. And the last thing I want to point out is that I think that the phrase ritual slaughter can potentially be misleading. I think that it conjures up visions of people in black capes dancing around a cow with loads of spears and doing all kinds of weird things. It's a surgical procedure of bringing about the death of an animal. And with regards to that, briefly, I'm going to outline how I'm going to argue the point, is that having done a fair bit of research into the literature covering ritual slaughter or the surgical death of the animal versus other methods of killing, I think that the science, and I'll go into this further in the actual debate, by definition is actually lacking. It's not conclusive by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that actually the question has to fall on those that want to stop it, as to considering the fact that there is such ambiguity in the scientific literature about whether the animal is or isn't under more or less pain, why they're so convinced that it has to be brought to an end. And I think that's in general how I'm going to argue, if that makes sense.
So just very short summary. You're saying that the scientific proof to the fact that they're actually suffering is not so scientific proven.
Yeah, I'll clarify a little bit more. I think that the scientific evidence does not show that ritual slaughter does not conclusively show that ritual slaughter is an inferior method to stunning, and based on the fact that there is not the scientific evidence, I think it falls out on the other side to justify why they feel so called to ban ritual slaughter.
Sebastiaan, how would you argue against this?
Well, as most animals before they are slaughtered, right now I'm a bit stunned. I'm very surprised that you would say that the science isn't in on this as far as this topic is concerned. It seems pretty obvious to me that we know what happens when you stun either a human being undergoing operation or an animal. It's all the same neurology, it's all the same way that our bodies are working, and so the effect is the same. They don't experience what's going on at that point. If they're not stunned, they do. And so if you are about to kill them, of course, there are a lot of alarm bells that go off internally. There is a lot of stress. There is also, of course, pain when you're cutting through all these cells which are, obviously experiencing pain. I mean, we understand how the body works. We know what happens when you cut into something. And I don't get which bit of the science you are questioning here. I feel like it is understood, and that is why we do anesthetics before an operation. That seems like a really odd thing for me to imply that that's what the level of thing you're questioning, but I don't see how it's different than what you're saying. And could you expand on it a bit more, please?
Sure. I also shared your intuitive assumptions before doing a bit more background research, and I think that it's important to realize that, firstly, on a philosophical level, there's a disconnect between evidence. It's hard to work out what is evidence for the conscious experience of pain. Obviously, I'm not here to argue that animals don't feel pain. That's a deeper, or that's a different conversation. Assuming that animals do feel pain, which I'm happy to subscribe to, and I personally do believe.
Let's also assume there's gravity. Yes, let's assume animals have pain. Then settling on indicators that they are experiencing pain is important. And in the literature, they constantly bang on about the fact that
if we assume this is an indicator, then X, Y, and Z. And then once you start to look at it, you can see that what they really focus on is the behavioral responses of the animal, the physical expressions. There is talk of looking at their brain waves and seeing how they respond to being killed, or having an incision in their neck. That's also around. But with regards to both, it's when you have a properly performed ritual slaughter, which we'll call shchita, by a trained professional with a super sharp knife. If you could look at the research of a woman in America called Temple Grandin, who is a fantastic individual. They do documentaries of her. She's an autistic woman that they bring into abattoirs because the way her brain works means that she can understand how animals respond to the abattoirs. So she's written tons and tons of scientific research on the issue of ritual slaughter. And she sees that when a properly performed ritual slaughter occurs, the incision occurs and the animals don't seem to respond negatively to it because they're out of action in about 2 seconds. The incision is done with there's research in a paper written by a professor called Rosen in 2004, where it explains that the knife is so sharp that the incision is not felt. It just goes straight through. The blood drains. They're unconscious in 2 seconds. And and what they're trying to show is that it doesn't seem that they're too adversely affected by this procedure, even though one would assume that, yes, if you were stabbed by a knife in the chest, you would feel it and it would be painful and it would be horrible. With ritual slaughter, the knife is so sharp. It's like when you're working with very sharp knives in a surgical setting, like a doctor or whatever, it happens that they cut themselves and they don't realize, because we're talking about knives that are so sharp that actually the pressure is not felt. And after 2 seconds, the animal is out. And when looking at the facial features of the animal, they don't respond as you might have expected with these pain responses. They don't seem to register too much at all. And I'm going to try and, in your response, I'm going to try and bring up the quote which she goes into that, because I think it's important.
I think, yeah, let's switch to Sebastiaan. I think your point came very clear across.
Right, okay. Well, yes, first I'll just go in slightly into what you said. Well, let's assume that animals feel pain, where, of course, I think that's just not an assumption. And even mentioning it as something that might be an assumption, and then following that by explaining how Temple Grandin understands how animals think, and which is because we are so closely linked that a human only has to be slightly different to other people to be so close to animals that they're able to communicate subverbally. So it's really very clear that animals are very much like humans in the way that they experience the world. And so I would go so far as to say, and I don't even know whether it's far, as that, of course, any considerations as would we do this to an animal, it's very similar in essence to would we be willing to do this to a human, which of course it becomes very relevant with ritual slaughter, but I'll try not to go that way too much, because of course then we're talking about so much more than this distinction, and I think it was valid that you said let's try to limit ourselves to that in this case. But the idea that it becomes very difficult when you say we're only going to be talking about a very specific moment, and that is that moment where the knife is already being put to the throat and it's being cut. And so let's not think about the stress and pain, especially stress, but also pain before that moment. But I also wonder, because you're explaining a lot about this, and I'm always interested, because you talk about it doesn't hurt if it's a professional. Now, the way you become a professional in something, the way you become good at something, as I understand it, is practice makes perfect. And that would imply that there's a lot of instances before someone is perfect, because the number of veins and the number of arteries, and especially, I've forgotten the nerve sense that you have to get through, it seems quite tricky. So I would imagine that even if you're good at this stuff, it's going to be very difficult, but especially the long road of reaching that point where could be considered professional, or whatever term is used, is one where a lot of animals are not happy to be on that road rather than the end of it. And so it's still a method which just investing in getting people to the point where they might be able to do it without hurting the animal is filled with, pain and suffering.
Jack?
Okay, so I'll try and speak fast. I have a very poor sense of time when I'm speaking.
No, that's fine. But maybe just to try to really specific, because I think it's a very interesting topic. If you have that knowledge, so go a little bit into the fact, how does one become a professional slaughter? I wanted to say, but it sounds weird. Schita. Person.
It's called a shochet. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, but I feel that I do need to address some other points first. This is first thing. So you're right. It does. When I was speaking, I was like, why am I saying this? It does come across as dodgy when you say, let's make a certain assumption, and then it sounds like I don't really buy into it. I personally do believe that animals experience pain. The reason I brought it up was because, unlike human beings, you can't ask them, is this painful? And therefore, a lot of the scientific literature deals with what is an indicator for animal pain, which itself is debated within the literature. And that was why I brought it up, which led me on to Temple and the research that predominant. And there's a fantastic piece I can send to anyone who's interested, which is a digest of all of the literature in about the last 20 years on this topic. And they conclude that the most useful indicator is facial responses, because I didn't want someone to think, well, why are we not talking about plugging it up to an EEG or whatever? The consensus is that we are using facial responses, which at the best of times are not necessarily the most certain indicator. But for either side, that means that the proof is non-conclusive. But I did whip up the comment. It's very, very short. She writes, and again, I recommend anyone just type in Temple Grad in ritual slaughter. You can find all her research on the topic. She says, and I agree with you, because intuitively it's bizarre, but we have to look at the science. She says, the animal is slaughtered without being stunned with a razor-sharp knife. When the cut is done correctly, the animal appears not to feel it. And cause I think I've made that point multiple times. Let's pause on that. And again, just explaining why it's important to limit the argument is because you and I are not debating whether or not we have a right to kill animals. In this debate, fundamentally, we're assuming the right to kill animals, and then we're talking about different methods of killing the animals. And I should also point out at this point that someone who has to be anti-ritual slaughter within that framework also has to be committed to the fact that it's not a blank count. You can't take up that position. If you're assuming that we're going to be killing animals and saying, well, ritual slaughter doesn't work, that leaves you with the other methods. And you have to seriously turn around and say that the other methods of stunning and gassing and electrically knocking them out are also great. And sometimes they do work well. But again...
I do have to think, I have to interject here, because it's not, that is certainly not what I am saying or necessarily feel like I would have to be saying. If we're saying that we should ban ritual slaughter, as in not make an exception for on religious grounds, if we look at all the civilized countries I've been able to find, they say, look, you have to stun an animal before you kill it, and they do have valid science that they're backing that up with. Should we make an exception there? What I'm arguing is the answer should be no. So I'm not then saying, okay, well, that's good. We got rid of the one bad thing, and now we'll keep doing the rest. But I think that's a very low bar that you can at least achieve. And you shouldn't be making exceptions for the few bits of legislation that you have been able to pass, because everyone gets that this is the bare minimum you can do.
I have to say,
sorry, Jack.
Huh?
Jack, I'm gonna
10 seconds. That's the exact point that I'm making, that within the conversation, I understand you probably have a greater goal that we should not be killing animals, but within the conversation that we're already assuming the legitimacy of killing animals. If you're going to say we need to ban ritual slaughter, then you have to commit to the fact that at least within that framework, stunning itself works very well. And again, you just have to read the research.
Jack, I'm going to interrupt you 1 second on that, because that's exactly a comment we got here. I'll just read it very quickly to you guys. And it's a comment by Daniel Granter, who says, would you not all agree that the debate should be slaughtering animals should be banned rather than simply ritual slaughter? Is it nonsensical that you would ban ritual slaughter and not bad mass slaughter? I mean, I'm not going to ask. So I'm going to specifically ask that question actually to Sebastiaan. I think that's more relevant to him than to Jack.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for asking the question, Daniel, and picking up on it. I would say that I feel ever so slightly hypocritical sitting here and focusing very much on this ritual slaughter, because when you look at exactly the mass slaughter that's going on anyway, the horrific circumstances that animals are living and dying under, as we say, in their masses, it is appalling what's going on. Just in the Netherlands, as an example, we have 450 million animals in this small country that has 17 million people, and already we say it's overpopulated. They are hidden away very well, and they don't have any light or fresh air or anything that they might desire. So to then focus specifically on ritual slaughter does seem odd, but it is, I would say, a part of a package of things which are wrong. And so when you asked me, would I argue against it? I said, yes, I would do that, because I do think this is also something that we need to ban, get rid of. And especially because I feel like once we've made that step, once it has become something that people can accept, that you do not kill any being as it's still conscious. If you're living in a world where for some reason you're saying, yeah, let's kill sentient beings for our consumption or for whatever reason, you don't do it whilst they're still conscious. Once we've reached that bar and people have had the chance to get used to it, maybe you'd have to get a generation further. Maybe it actually turns out to be quite easy. Then actually I can hold hands with a lot of Jewish people who really have shown me that they do care about animal welfare. And I think it's really a shame that it's this topic, this right, which they still want to hold on to from, well, what I would say is an archaic age, a long time ago. Once that's gone of, we could actually move forward and recognize together all the other bad things that are going on. And maybe I would feel very differently about this if I saw a stronger lobby, not just from classic animal rights, but also from Jewish and Muslim communities talking against this mass slaughter in other forms. Okay. Because they think their form is better. But I'm seeing everyone happy with the status quo, and that's the issue.
I'm going to flip the question. Thank you, Sebastiaan. It's a question to Jack, because you spoke in debate about scientific evidence showcasing the fact that it might not be painful for the animal, or at least that's what the research shows. Now, let's assume the other way around. Let's say that there would be conclusive evidence that shows that the animal indeed suffers much more than, let's say, normal slaughter. What would you say in that case? Would you still say, okay, the Jews should be allowed, or Muslims should be allowed to have ritual slaughter, or would you then say maybe something else? Maybe it's time to reform our religion. Is it time for a new approach to this topic?
Look, I have to say that I never said that the research shows conclusively that animals don't feel pain. I just said that the research is fundamentally unconclusive, and even in review articles, it's not clear that this is a particularly painful method of bringing about the death of the animal. I think that the question you just asked, I'd have to prepare for another debate to answer that question. That's a question about the nature. That's a deeper question. I think that what's important right now to focus on, and I feel slightly bad to do this because again, I don't think this is Sebastiaan's fundamental position, but I think that he has got to answer the question which is being posed, which I hinted at, and which the question definitely formulated much clearer than I did, which is, if the research is unconclusive, if you cannot look at science and turn around and say that ritual slaughter is a more painful method of killing than stunning and killing, because the science just simply doesn't back that statement up. If you are someone that subscribes to the position that we should not be killing animals at all, then that's fine. But in the context of saying we are killing animals, how can you come along and say, well, we're killing animals, but we shouldn't be doing ritual slaughter? The science doesn't back you up at all on that point. And why on earth would you be focusing on ritual slaughter at all when your campaign has to be against the bringing about the end of slaughter per se? And I think that is I think that's a good question you have to answer.
Sebastiaan.
Okay, I will. First, gosh, I have to admit I'm pretty tired right now, and I should be able to remember two questions at the same time. But what was your first question?
No, I think that, I mean, the main question is that if scientific evidence doesn't show or is not conclusive about the fact
right.
that...
Thank you.
Yes.
Good question, although scientific evidence does show what the effect of stunning is. It's that simple. We know what it means to stun a being. They lose their consciousness for a time. And it's much easier to stun than to kill. And so there's much simpler ways of stunning. You don't have to have trained a lot and to have made a lot of mistakes to be able to stun properly. There's quite easy ways of doing that. I'm not saying that all the methods we currently use are good methods, but you can do it. And when you are killing without having stunned, then it is that act of killing where there's going to be a lot of pain. The body doesn't immediately shut off. That is just not what is happening. It's all in a brain center, and it has some blood, and it stays conscious, and you're going to get a flood of signals that things are very, very wrong when, decapitation or a sort of decapitation happens, because you're saying we're slicing away everything of importance. And so it's clear that there is going to be pain in that moment, and that they are conscious of the moment that it's about to happen. They're witnessing all that, whereas if you're stunning, they're not going to be witnessing that. So that was the first thing. And you did ask a second good question as well.
I think that was the entire... then why are you focusing on that? But you answered that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, all right.
That's also let me show, because that's also a question we got here from Ross Collins, and I think it's for Sebastiaan. Why does your party focus so much on the topic of ritual slaughter rather than regular slaughter?
We absolutely don't. So I got this invitation to debate about ritual slaughter, and it is something we've looked at in the past, and that's why I feel like I didn't completely answer your second question yet, and I would like to now, because it ties into what Ross is asking. Why would we spend so much time on this? It's because animal welfare is completely overlooked, has been overlooked by politicians in our country for a very long time. They think politics is all about the economy. Essentially, that's it, and every now and then there's things like healthcare comes along, and you'd even have, fortunately, parties talking about the climate, but animal welfare just is overlooked. And so you see that in legislation like this, where we say you're not allowed to kill animals unless they're stunned, except for religious reasons. And that is a moment where we go, okay, so this is showing how unimportant animal welfare is to you if you're saying just religious reasons are good enough to say, oh, go ahead and let them suffer then. It's clearly putting them at such a placing such a low moral value on their state of well-being compared to humans, that we say this is a really clear sign, just as the whole society is accepting that, not just the people perpetrating, but that is just considered normal, that would be a valid excuse to do behavior that we would otherwise say we shouldn't be doing. That is why it has been a focus for us. Yes, we have spent time, devoted time on it, certainly a couple of years ago. We're going to do it again soon, but it's not just our key issue or anything like that. There are loads of issues that we're working on. So there was an incorrect assumption from the person asking the question. Okay. We look at it, but we look at many more things.
Then we're coming to an end, which means that we both have you basically. Sebastiaan just spoke, so we're gonna give the word to Jack. Jack, did you have 1 minute max? And I'm timing because we're really running out of time. You can make your conclusive statements, and Sebastiaan will have a minute, and then that's it, guys.
All right. I just very quickly, if Sebastiaan's, I think, correct to say that just like all stunning isn't great, but in principle, he'll subscribe to it. Within the context of this conversation, and I'll say that applies to the training of the shochet as well. That we're talking about shchita and banning shchita by a trait. You can bring in regulations of having a high level shochet do the job. But I think that despite the fact that I've reiterated multiple times that the science is inconclusive, Sebastiaan will always bring up the intuitive argument, but the intuitive argument that it must feel pain because of the brain and the nerves and this and the other. But the science just doesn't back that up. And then the question then becomes, like Ross said, that despite the fact that it's not your key issue, would you say that because the science doesn't back you up, I think you have to commit that any focus on ritual slaughter as a specific is a double standard, because your focus is on all slaughter, which is legitimate. When you focus on ritual slaughter without the science backing you up based on intuitive arguments, I think that's a double standard, and I think that's my point.
I'm going to cut you. Thank you so much, Sebastiaan. You have 1 minute to conclude.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, no, that I would just say, because in a minute I'm not going to be able to repeat everything, but fortunately all I would have to do is repeat what I'd already said so people can watch the video again, perhaps. No, I explained really clearly why ritual slaughter is a good thing to focus on, and it's not simply because of the animal suffering, it's also of what it shows about the way our society looks at how much do we value the suffering of animals, or getting rid of the suffering of animals, and the idea that religious freedom should have a higher priority, and that's a reason to make exceptions to legislation which is just massively approved of. That's a really bad thing, and that's why ritual slaughter is a good thing to focus on, even though it's only a small part of things.
Great.
And again, I would also just say very quickly, because I think I have a little bit of my minute left.
Yeah, 10 seconds.
Okay, all right.
Go.
You can keep saying the science isn't in, but it's actually the case that looking at our evolutionary history, the basic assumption is that animals are a lot like humans. The closer they are, certainly mammals should be a lot like humans, and it would be surprising if that were not the case, that they experience the same way we do.
Sebastiaan, Jack, thank you so much for participating in our first live video debate here at Quality Debates. Thank you, and we hope that the viewers out there liked it. Sorry, I saw there were some comments. We didn't have enough time to answer them all, but you can find these guys online. So if you have any question, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. They're in our Facebook group, so feel free. I guess I'm saying it. Can they send you a message on Facebook if they have questions for you guys? Yes.
Well, they can send my organization a message, and then maybe I'll delegate.
So you can send organization questions. Guys, thank you very much. And we're going to end the stream.
Okay. Bye. Thank you for watching.